In class, we'll discuss the rise of the Ottoman and Safavid empires, both of which governed dynamic, religiously diverse territories. They were Muslim states, Sunni in the case of the Ottomans and Shia in the case of the Safavids, but both empires contained large Christian and Jewish minorities, as well as minorities belonging to rival interpretations of Islam. As both empires expanded by harnessing the power of gunpowder, they came to be known as the Gunpowder Empires. We'll cover the rivalry between these two states in class, as well as the diplomatic correspondence between them as they prepared for war in 1514. It's not necessary to have a broad background in Middle Eastern history to understand the threatening letter sent by Selim I, nor of the ironic response offered by the Safavid Shah Ismail. This lecture is meant to give an overview of the Third Gunpowder Empire, the Mughal dynasty of India. The name Mughal is a corruption of the word Mongol, the Central Asian empire that long served as an inspiration to successor states throughout the region. Among those claiming descent from the Mongol ruler Genghis Khan was the early 16th century king of Kabul, a man who came to be known as Babur, or Tiger in Persian. Babur's descent from Genghis Khan was something of a stretch, but he was the great-grandson of Tamerlane, the Central Asian ruler who sought to emulate his supposed Mongol ancestor. As king of Kabul, Babur encouraged the creation of a learned court. Babur fancied himself as something of a poet, and much of what we know about his life comes from his own autobiography. Born in what is now modern Uzbekistan, Babur had been driven out of his homeland and forced to cross into Afghanistan, where he rallied discontented Pashtuns and seized the throne. Babur's ambitions, though, extended beyond Afghanistan, to the rich central plains of early modern India. Northern India had for centuries been a contested zone between Hindus, Buddhists, and Muslims. While Muslim merchants dominated India's seaborne trade from the early 7th century onward, actual political control did not begin until much later, when Muslim invaders from Persia crossed the snowy Hindu Kush mountains in the 11th century and seized much of what is now Pakistan and the Sindh province of modern India. In the 13th century, Muhammad of Ghori would establish a realm that later grew into the Sultanate of Delhi, an expansionist Muslim state that swiftly overran much of central India. Unlike many Muslim-ruled lands to the west, where Islam gradually became the religion of the majority, Islam in much of India would never expand beyond a minority of the population. The subcontinent would remain majority Hindu, though relations between Hindus and Muslims were complicated by Islamic rules governing religious minorities. In the Quran, the only peoples entitled to toleration are Jews and Christians, the so-called peoples of the book who were said to have received revelations from God that they later corrupted. Believers in all other religions were said to be pagans, who were to be given a choice of conversion or death. As a practical matter, this was impossible, especially once Muslim armies began conquering lands where religions other than Judaism or Christianity predominated. In Persia, Muslim rulers acknowledged the Zoroastrian majority as a people of the book, which, among other things, entitled them to toleration on the payment of the jizya, a tax of roughly 10% of land or income. In India, Hindus would also be recognized as a people of the book. But since these concessions were offered by individual rulers, with no explicit Quranic basis, they could easily be overturned by their more puritanical successors. In Muslim-controlled parts of India, Hindus experienced relative toleration in some periods, but not in others, veering from persecution to toleration and back to persecution. Temples patronized by one Muslim ruler would be destroyed by another. But despite such chronic instability, Hinduism remained the religion of India's majority. When Babur crossed into India in 1526, he did so at the invitation of a disgruntled provincial governor, Daulat Khan. Daulat had become estranged from the reigning Sultan of Delhi, Ibrahim Lodi, and thought that Babur would enable him to shore up his power. He was right. Babur defeated Ibrahim Lodi at the Battle of Panipat in 1526, seizing Delhi and establishing his own dynasty in the heart of India's central plateau. His new empire, one that we can now begin calling Mughal, struggled to consolidate power in the years following Babur's death, but the accession of his grandson Akbar in 1556 would usher in a golden age for India. After centuries of religious conflict and uneasy coexistence between Hindus and Muslims, Akbar decided to dispense with the jizya tax altogether, accepting practitioners of both religions on equal terms. Although he was raised a Muslim, Akbar displayed a keen interest in a kind of religious universalism and would periodically convene councils of religious scholars and theologians from multiple faith traditions, including Hinduism, Islam, Buddhism, Judaism, Christianity, and Sikhism, a recent Indian faith that emerged during the 15th century. In 1575, he created a house of worship called the Ibdat Khana, which was open to practitioners of any faith. A few years later, he even sought to create his own religion, the Din Ilahi, or divine faith, that combined what he saw as the best features of all the religions with which he was familiar, one mostly drawn from Islamic and Hindu traditions, but also including Christian and Buddhist elements as well. This new faith failed to attract many converts, most of whom were perfectly content to remain in their own traditions. But it captures something of Akbar's religious views, ones we'll discuss in depth in our class on religion and toleration in a couple weeks. Akbar believed that all religions contained an element of truth, and the purpose of all men and women was to seek that truth. Given these beliefs, it should come as no surprise that Akbar promoted the education of women, something frowned upon by both Orthodox Muslims and Orthodox Hindus. He established schools for women and founded a sprawling library at Fatehpur Sikri that was intended exclusively for use by women. He also provided over a glittering court, attracting poets and scholars from India and beyond. His realm featured a dynamic commercial economy, one that would be even further expanded by his successors. India's 16th and 17th century wealth can perhaps best be illustrated not only by the word Mughal, which came to mean a powerful person of any background, think business mogul, TV mogul, and so on, as well as its awe-inspiring building projects. These include India's Taj Mahal, built by Akbar's grandson Shah Jahan to commemorate his wife. 20,000 artisans were employed in constructing this project, which would cost the equivalent of $1 billion in today's money. Begun in 1632, it would be completed in 1653 and would shortly thereafter become the burial ground of Shah Jahan himself, who followed his wife to the grave in 1658. Shah Jahan's death marked the end of the golden age of the Mughal state. His successor, Aurangzeb, was a fundamentalist Muslim with no interest in ruling a cosmopolitan empire. He shuttered Hindu temples, persecuted religious minorities, and waged wars of conquest against the last remaining Hindu states of southern India. This produced a backlash from his subjects, the majority of whom were Hindu, of course. Aurangzeb was feared enough to put a lid on dissent, but after he died in 1707, provinces repeatedly rebelled, requiring Mughal armies to put them down. This depressed trade and created instability, and the Mughal central government, as it turned out, would never recover.